There are moments in life when collapse is not partial but absolute. The business you built with years of sweat crumbles in a single season. The relationship you invested your heart in ends in betrayal. The future you imagined with confidence is replaced by a silence so heavy it feels eternal. It is in these moments when everything breaks that you discover what kind of person you truly are. Most people, when struck by disaster, choose retreat. They hide, they numb themselves with distractions, or they seek someone to blame. But a smaller number, a rare breed, hear another call, the call to rebuild. Niccolò Machiavelli, the ruthless realist of Renaissance politics, knew this truth well. His own life was shattered, imprisoned, tortured, exiled, his reputation smeared. Yet in that exile he wrote The Prince, a book that has outlived kings and emperors. From his ruin he created immortality. Jordan Peterson, in our own age, tells a similar story in another register, that human beings are not destroyed by chaos if they accept responsibility, impose order, and carry the heaviest burden they can shoulder. This video is about that journey, how to rebuild yourself after collapse, after failure, after betrayal. We will walk through 7 steps, each drawn from the combined wisdom of Machiavelli and Peterson, one a master of power, the other a guide of the modern soul. Together they form a blueprint for resurrection, for turning ruins into foundations, and for proving that when fortune breaks you, you can rise again. Part 1. Facing the ruins without illusion. The first step is brutal honesty. Machiavelli insisted that rulers must see the world as it is, not as they wish it to be. A man who neglects what is done for what ought to be done, he warned, sooner affects his ruin than his preservation. The same law applies. When life collapses, your temptation will be to cover the ruins with illusions. To say, it wasn't so bad, I'll be fine soon. To dream that things will return to how they were. But illusions are dangerous because they delay the work of rebuilding. Jordan Peterson echoes this with psychological urgency. In his lectures he says, do not lie to yourself. Do not pretend that things are other than they are. Why? Because self-deception corrodes the soul. When your world falls apart, the most courageous act is to stare directly at the devastation. Count your losses. Name your failures. Admit what is gone forever. This confrontation is not weakness, it is strength. For only by admitting the depth of the wound can you begin the work of healing. Machiavelli experienced this himself. Once celebrated in Florence, he was suddenly accused of conspiracy. He was imprisoned, tortured on the rack, and exiled. He could have lived in nostalgia, clinging to illusions of his past glory. But instead he looked at his ruin without denial. He admitted that fortune had destroyed him, and from that place of honesty, he began to write. His masterpiece was born not from comfort but from ruin. Peterson advises his audience similarly, begin with what is true, however painful. If your marriage has ended, admit it is dead. If your career is destroyed, admit you must start again. If your reputation is stained, admit that trust must be rebuilt from nothing. To face the ruins is to clear away the rubble so you can see the ground beneath. There is clarity in collapse. When everything breaks, illusions fall away. You see who abandoned you and who remained. You see which habits betrayed you. You see the fragility of the dreams you once held. This clarity is harsh, but it is also liberating, for now you stand before the raw materials of a new life. Part 2. Taking radical responsibility. Once you have faced the ruins, the second step is to seize radical responsibility. Machiavelli's world was merciless. Fortune, he said, controls half of our actions, but the other half is within our power. If you surrender to fortune, you are her slave. If you cultivate virtue, courage, discipline, adaptability, you can resist her. Jordan Peterson's message aligns perfectly. Stop blaming the world, your family, your enemies, or fate. He tells his audience, pick up your burden and walk forward. Start by cleaning your room. Put your house in order before you criticize the world. This is not trivial advice. It is the foundation of power. To rebuild yourself, you must stop waiting for someone else to fix you. No apology from an enemy, no miracle of luck, no rescue will save you. Responsibility begins when you say, this is mine to rebuild. Why is responsibility so powerful? Because blame weakens you. When you blame others, you give them control over your future. When you blame fate, you become passive. a victim waiting for another disaster. But when you take responsibility, you seize control of the story. The ruins are no longer meaningless, they are lessons. Each failure becomes a stone with which you build. Each betrayal becomes knowledge of whom not to trust. Each weakness exposed becomes an opportunity for strength. Machiavelli knew that rulers who blamed fortune collapsed again and again. But those who learned from disaster, who studied their mistakes, who rebuilt their armies, who tightened their control, those rulers rose stronger after every fall. And Peterson insists that meaning itself emerges only when you shoulder responsibility. It is in carrying the heaviest weight you can bear that you discover who you truly are. Radical responsibility does not mean self-hatred. It means self-mastery. It is not to wallow in guilt, but to act with power. It is to say, yes, I failed, but I will learn. Yes, I lost, but I will rise. Yes, I was broken, but I will rebuild myself. This shift turns despair into energy. The ruins become the foundation, and responsibility becomes the hinge upon which your resurrection turns. Without responsibility, collapse is the end. With responsibility, collapse is the beginning. Part 3. Rebuilding with order and discipline. When the ruins have been faced and responsibility has been claimed, the next step is the slow, grinding work of discipline. Collapse often comes quickly, but rebuilding never does. Machiavelli warned that states are not secured in a single victory, but through steady order. He compared ruling to building fortresses, brick by brick, carefully without haste. Likewise, Peterson reminds us that chaos can only be resisted through the imposition of order, beginning with the smallest routines of daily life. This is the paradox. When everything has collapsed, the temptation is to reach for something grand, something heroic, a sudden transformation that wipes away the memory of failure. But Machiavelli would laugh at such fantasy. He knew that power is consolidated not in sudden bursts, but in patient discipline. He wrote that fortune may open the door once, but only order and strength keep it open. Peterson echoes this when he tells people to aim low. Start small and build upward. Clean your room. Structure your day. Take care of your body. These are not trivial acts. They are the foundation of resurrection. Imagine the soldier who loses a battle. He does not rush blindly into the next fight. He rebuilds his discipline. He sharpens his sword, trains his body, studies his enemy. Imagine the man who loses his fortune. If he spends his days in despair, he remains poor. If he disciplines himself, studies his craft, saves every coin, he can rise again. Machiavelli praised Cesare Borgia, a ruthless leader who, after each setback, rebuilt his forces with discipline until he commanded fear across Italy. Discipline is not glamorous. It is repetitive, sometimes boring, often lonely, but it is what separates those who remain broken from those who rise. Peterson insists that human beings crave order because order gives meaning. The room you clean, the schedule you follow, the habit you enforce. These are the bricks of your new fortress. And when the storms of fortune return, as they always do, the disciplined will stand while the undisciplined fall again. Part 4. The power of strategy and foresight. Rebuilding is not only about discipline, it is about strategy. Machiavelli was not merely a writer of principles. He was a strategist. He argued that rulers must always prepare for conflict, anticipate betrayal, and see farther than their enemies. He wrote that fortune favors those who are ready, those who plan, those who foresee dangers before they arrive. In the same way, when your life has collapsed, rebuilding requires not only effort but foresight. Jordan Peterson approaches this psychologically. He insists that people must have a vision of the future. Without a goal, without a map, life becomes chaos. Discipline without direction is sterile. Order without aim becomes tyranny. So he tells his audience, set your aim high. Imagine who you could be. Decide the highest good you can pursue and move toward it. Strategy, then, is the union of Machiavelli's realism with Peterson's vision. You must plan for resistance, knowing that betrayal, difficulty, and loss will return. But you must also hold before you an image of what you are striving toward. The man who has lost everything must ask, what kind of person do I want to become? The woman whose heart is broken must ask, what life is worth building now? Machiavelli knew that without strategy, rulers were devoured by enemies who thought farther ahead. He warned that fortune strikes those who are unprepared. Peterson similarly warns that aimless people drift into despair, addiction, and resentment. To rebuild, you must become a strategist of your own existence. Anticipate your weaknesses. Plan your defenses. Set your aim. Strategy turns survival into victory. And remember, strategy is not fantasy. Machiavelli despised empty dreaming. Strategy is vision combined with realism. It is not merely hoping that life will be better, but charting a path and preparing for obstacles. It is the commander studying his maps before the campaign. It is the scholar preparing his arguments before debate. It is you rebuilding your life with eyes open, no longer fooled by illusions, no longer enslaved by fortune, but guiding yourself with foresight. Part 5. The role of courage in rebirth. Even with discipline and strategy, there is a moment when rebuilding requires something more: courage. For all his realism, Machiavelli admired audacity. He wrote that fortune favors the bold, that those who wait too long for perfect conditions are crushed by hesitation. He believed that when the moment arrives, decisive action must be taken even at great risk. Jordan Peterson echoes this in his call to confront chaos voluntarily, to face the dragon of fear rather than cower before it. Courage is the bridge between planning and action. You can face the ruins, you can take responsibility, you can discipline yourself and form strategies, but sooner or later you must act. You must walk into the unknown, risk failure again, and expose yourself to the possibility of pain. Without courage, the plan remains on paper, the discipline remains private, and the strategy remains theoretical. With courage, the plan becomes reality, the discipline bears fruit, and the strategy turns into victory. Machiavelli observed that rulers who hesitated at decisive moments lost their states. Peterson reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to face it. He often says, "The things you need most are found where you least want to look." That is courage, to walk into the fire rather than hide from it. Think of the man betrayed in love. To rebuild, he must eventually risk love again. Think of the entrepreneur who lost her fortune. To rise, she must risk another venture. Think of the leader disgraced. To return, he must risk his reputation in public once more. Every act of rebuilding requires stepping into danger again. That step cannot be made with certainty. It must be made with courage. Courage is the lifeblood of rebirth. Machiavelli saw it in generals who attacked against the odds. Peterson sees it in ordinary people who face addictions, grief, and despair, yet choose to act. When you are rebuilding yourself, courage is the moment when the ruins become the foundation, when the plan becomes the path, and when the broken soul becomes a rising force. Without courage, collapse remains collapse. With courage, collapse becomes the seed of a greater life. Part 6. Transforming pain into strength. Every collapse leaves scars. Every betrayal leaves bitterness. Every loss leaves pain that gnaws at the soul. The ordinary person tries to bury that pain, to drown it in distraction, to silence it with denial. But Machiavelli and Peterson would both reject this weakness. For them, pain is not to be avoided, it is to be used. Machiavelli lived in humiliation. Once a respected diplomat, he was reduced to exile, ignored by the powerful, mocked by those who once served him. Yet from his pain, he drew the clarity that produced The Prince, one of the most influential books ever written. His pain became ink, his exile became wisdom, his humiliation became the soil of immortality. Peterson speaks the same language in psychological terms. He teaches that suffering is not optional, it is inevitable, but meaning is found when suffering is voluntarily confronted and transformed into responsibility. In suffering are the seeds of meaning, he says. To deny suffering is to deny growth. To embrace suffering is to create transformation. When your world collapses, pain will be your constant companion. But instead of asking, "Why me?" you must ask, "What can I build from this?" The betrayal can teach you discernment. The failure can teach you resilience. The humiliation can teach you humility and sharpen your strength. Every wound can either infect or harden. Every scar can either disfigure or fortify. Machiavelli would remind us that rulers forged in suffering become more cunning, more capable, more ruthless in their wisdom. Peterson would add that individuals who bear suffering responsibly radiate strength that inspires others. Pain, then, is not the end of rebuilding, it is the fuel of it. You do not rebuild in spite of pain. You rebuild because of it and through it. Part 7. Rising with purpose beyond the self. There is, however, a danger in rebuilding. The danger of rebuilding only for yourself. Machiavelli knew that power must serve not only the rulers, pride, but the stability of the state. A prince who rebuilt only for personal gain soon lost his crown. Likewise, Peterson insists that meaning is not found in selfish pleasure, but in responsibility that serves something greater than yourself. To rise after collapse is not only to restore your own life, it is to use your strength for others. The man who has suffered and risen becomes a guide for those still in ruins. The woman who has endured heartbreak and rebuilt her soul becomes a source of hope for others. The leader who has failed and returned becomes an example of courage for those who follow. Peterson teaches that purpose is discovered when you voluntarily shoulder burdens for the good of others, your family, your community, your society. Machiavelli would agree, though in different language. The ruler who maintains order, stability, and legacy is the one whose power endures. Both point to this truth. Rebuilding is complete not when you stand alone in triumph, but when your strength stabilizes the world around you. This final stage elevates rebuilding from survival to greatness. Anyone can claw their way back for selfish reasons, but the one who rises with purpose beyond the self creates something immortal. Machiavelli's name endures, because he wrote not only for himself, but for future rulers. Peterson's influence spreads, because his message is not merely self-help, but collective renewal. So too, your rebuilding becomes truly powerful when it is tied to a purpose greater than your private gain, ending the secret of rising again. And so we return to the question, how do you rebuild yourself after everything breaks? The answer is not simple, but it is possible. You must begin with brutal honesty, facing the ruins without illusion. You must seize radical responsibility, refusing to blame fate or others. You must cultivate discipline, imposing order on the chaos. You must form strategy, seeing farther than the present pain. You must summon courage, daring to act when fear whispers retreat. You must transform pain into strength, turning scars into weapons. And finally, you must rise with purpose beyond yourself, building not only for your own glory, but for something greater. Machiavelli and Jordan Peterson, though separated by centuries, converge on the same truth. Collapse is not the end. Collapse is the beginning. Machiavelli's exile gave birth to his masterpiece. Peterson's struggles forged the philosophy that now inspires millions. Both men prove that ruin can be the seed of resurrection. So when your world collapses, remember this: fortune may destroy your plans, betrayal may shatter your trust, pain may cut you deeply, but as long as you breathe, you can rebuild. And if you rebuild with honesty, with responsibility, with discipline, strategy, courage, resilience, and purpose, you will not only rise again, you will rise greater than before. The ruins are not your grave. They are your foundation. And from them, with the wisdom of Machiavelli and the challenge of Jordan Peterson, you can begin again.